everyone and welcome back to the DMSide. In today's video we are going to continue our journey through the monster manual and focus in on constructs that you need in your campaign. Now, as always, give this video a thumbs up, it'll really help the channel. Comment down below your favorite construct at the end and consider subscribing for more D&D content. Let's do it! Our very first construct on the list for today's video is a monster that is not only a formidable foe in the battlefield, but can also be considered a magical item for your players to attain and have join the party. This creature is known as the Shield Guardian. It is primarily created by wizards as a means to protect themselves from your more physically inclined fighter type. How can you use them in your campaign? Well, at a lower level sort of area, let's say 1 to 5, you could have the Shield Guardian really just be a means of distraction or a way to hold back and fend off your party members so that your NPC wizard can actually continue doing the ritual that they're trying to finish. They can find the information that they're looking for and eventually just escape without being hurt. At your higher levels, you can have the wizard be on the battlefield with them, and because they are in control of the Shield Guardian, they actually gain some benefits. First of all, apart from the fact that the Shield Guardian has a really high AC and sports a decent amount of health, along with doing a decent amount of damage on its own, the Shield Guardian can also store within itself, and use later on obviously, a spell of 4th level or lower. Once a day, I'm pretty sure it is. On top of that, you will then have your wizard obviously casting spells throughout the battle, so this creates quite a dynamic for your players to have to deal with. Now, I do mention that it depends on who's in control of the Shield Guardian. So as long as you're in control of it and it's within 5 feet of you, you will actually get a buff to your AC, and should you be separated during the battle and take damage, the Shield Guardian can actually take half of that damage instead. And there's a very important reason why. When creating a Shield Guardian, there is a master amulet that is also created along with it. Whoever controls the amulet controls the Shield Guardian. So your players could acquire it that way. Now, how do you destroy a Shield Guardian? Pretty much any way you would normally destroy a monster. Reduce its health and it's gone. But a faster way is remove the amulet from the wearer and destroy the amulet. Now, if you do that, your players obviously won't have access to controlling it and using it in the party. It becomes this lifeless construct, this statue really. So DMs, really be aware of the ramifications of how that would go down in your party. Do you want your players to have this literal tank that can store magic in it, or do you think that's something that is probably not going to be really great to have in the party? So, should they destroy the amulet, can they repair it? I'd say they can. You generally can create an amulet with 1,000 gold pieces and a week's worth of downtime, but say you had the leftover pieces of a destroyed amulet, you could possibly repair that for half the cost and maybe a little bit more time. You decide, DMs. I mean, really, at the end of the day, you know your party and you know how the story is going. If you think this thing is a bit too OP and needs a lot more time and effort put into it, have your players go after the materials rather than just purchasing them and finding someone to make the amulet for them. Make that a whole side quest that could go over 3 to 4 sessions or even more. Heck, tie it into your storyline so eventually they get that reward of gaining it later on. Maybe the wizard got away and actually has another amulet or knows how to work on an amulet that is going to then use it. So they keep the body and all of a sudden the creature wakes up and starts attacking them. It's very creative, it's a lot of fun, and it's a fantastic addition to your campaign. The next construct we have on our list is the Helmed Horror. Now, very similar to the Shield Guardian in the sense that they both actually are created as a means of protection for a spellcaster such as a wizard or a warlock, really your choice, but is very different in many other ways. So, the Helmed Horror has a base intelligence, which means it can understand commands on a more implied level rather than the Shield Guardian, which takes all of its commands quite literally. As well as the Helmed Horror in battle, though a lower challenge rating to be fair than the Shield Guardian, has some really interesting differences. The Helmed Horror can change its battle style to match what your players are actually putting out. It won't just always go for the nearest enemy. It can actually understand that your spellcasters can be more dangerous. It can understand that taking out the cleric can actually be a benefit to it because of this standard intelligence, similar to commoners and even your adventurers who have a base 10 stat in intelligence. So don't just think that these are lumbering hulks of armor. And to go on that, they're not just really strong armor. They actually are very difficult to put down because they take half the damage resistant to non-magical weapons unless the weapons are made from adamantium metal. Otherwise, you need to be using your spells. On top of that, the spells are an issue because these creatures are immune to necrotic damage, radiant damage, necrotic force damage and poison damage. Now that force damage is big because your clerics usually are going to be running around casting their spells such as spiritual weapon, which it does force damage, and all of a sudden that doesn't work anymore. Now beyond that, whoever creates these creatures can actually also imbue them with immunity to 3 spells, specific spells from any list. Now in the monster manual, it does give you a standard set of 3 spells, but you can change that as a DM. The standard 3 are Fireball, Guiding Bolt, and Heat Metal. So they're pretty common spells that get used quite a lot in Dungeons and Dragons. So how do you use these creatures in your campaign? Well, you could have them as really a gate guardian for your villain. Put them right at the entranceway, so that's the first thing your players have to deal with. High level players will deal with this creature very easily. Mid-range will struggle with it a little bit, but still be able to continue on. And your low level, this is going to be quite a strong enemy. Very, very scary, really. Like if you around level 4 is a good way to have these monsters be pretty frightening. But outside of that, you could have a trap door on the floor where your players fall into it and then come out into this battle arena where this creature is waiting for them and they're trapped, and the only way to get out is to destroy it, or maybe to figure out a puzzle as it's moving around mowing down your players. Or you could have it in a underground grave, protecting the grave of a long dead hero or an evil necromancer who has left this creature to protect its horde in the hopes that they will one day return, perhaps as a lich. So there's a lot of ways you can use them. These creatures cannot be used as magical items like the Shield Guardian. It is best to dispose of them as quickly as possible. So our next 2 constructs are actually taken from the Curse of Strahd campaign. Now that doesn't mean that you cannot use them. Obviously you can change them to fit your campaign however you would like them to. Now the very first one is known as Pitowick II. Basically it's actually got no battle features at all. It can attack, but it's not very gonna do a lot of damage, let's face it. But it's a small robotic creature that takes the form of a jester. And basically this is totally for your more social campaigns, you know? It's very Chucky vibes.
You've been very naughty, Miss Kettlewell.
Have that little doll that runs around, makes friends with the players, and they think it's really cute, and all of a sudden it starts stealing their things, giving information to its actual master, or really trying to kill them in inconvenient ways, like pushing them downstairs, pushing them into, I don't know, those blades that swing across like in Indiana Jones, just getting in the way and making damage happen. They can be really cool, and it doesn't have to be a jester. You really could change it to suit your campaign. Maybe it's a noble and it's actually the doll of the noble's child and they're in love with it, and you realize, hey, that thing's evil, we have to get rid of it. Or perhaps you've been sent off to go and find a creature similar to this because it's meant to be good luck, but all of a sudden when you return it, you get blamed for the fact you brought home this evil creature. You can really play with them and put them in very interesting scenarios. Have a merchant give it to them. So there's not really much else that can be said about them. Just have a look at Pitowick II from the Curse of Strahd campaign, and then watch Chucky, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to figure out how to put this into your story. It can be extremely horrifying, really creepy, and the fact that if they don't completely destroy the parts, as long as it has 1 hit point left and plays dead, basically, it can regain and reform itself and then come back to terrorize your players further on in the future. Now, the second one from Curse of Strahd is known as the Creeping Hut. Specifically, it's Baba Lyzga's Creeping Hut. And this construct is a tree trunk that has been brought to life through magical means. And it is, and I am not joking when I say this word, it is a gargantuan creature. This monstrosity, I'm surprised it's not a monstrosity, but this construct actually has a 60-foot reach for its legs that can just swing out and attack a monster from far away. It does move pretty slow, to be fair. I think like 15 feet. But who needs that? Who needs movement when you're that big, you have that much reach, and you're sporting quite a couple hundred hit points? How do you use it in your campaign? Well, perhaps you have a hag that is very similar to Baba Lyzga and has a creeping hut, and all of a sudden wants to take over a small town, village, or even maybe bombard a large city. These things are siege engines, so it can actually literally just cascade through a brick wall that your players are trying to fend off from a big army of undead creatures and creatures of the night, basically, as this hag riding upon this gargantuan tree trunk creeps over the hills and comes for the city in the night. You could even have it be the leftover remains of a once great druid city, and the actual druids that died in the process of this creature being constructed. The blood and the sorrow has wept down into it, and so the actual creature takes its revenge on any living creature, any living thing that isn't an animal, basically. So mostly humanoids, as they're trudging through forests looking for magical items. Very cool creatures, both Pitowick and the Creeping Hut. I would highly encourage you having a look at them and seeing how you can include them in your campaign. Dwarves and elves are some of the most classic D&D races that you can play in your campaign, but they do come with their counterparts. So the elves have the drow and the dwarves have the Durga. Our next construct will be focusing on the Durga. So, known as dark dwarves sometimes, and mostly treated as an evil race amongst the fantasy world, but to a more skilled DM, you could really play them off as an misunderstood race that is really doing their best to survive and holding one hell of a grudge. In Durga society, it's pretty common knowledge that the dwarven pantheon gods allowed them to be taken as slaves by the evil underground mind flayer. Now, if you don't know what a mind flayer is, check out either here or here for the video linked to the aberrations video in previous weeks. But moving on, they hold a pretty big grudge. However, some Durga, though they don't like dwarves and they're pretty upset about the whole thing, don't actively work towards destroying the dwarven pantheon, and can actually be seen as betrayers to Durga society because of it. As punishment, they can be put inside of our construct, the Durga Hammer. They can actually physically be put inside of this construct, this creation, which is fueled from the pain of their captor. Now, a Durga Hammer's sole purpose is to dig tunnels and repel invaders. So, how do you actually use these in your campaign? Well, two specific ways that I actually really like. If you're running an Underdark campaign, you could have your players befriend a Durga who actually helps them. Maybe they work together for a couple of sessions where, though pretty rough around the edges the entire time, does kind of have a bit of a charm towards the end of it. And as they farewell their Durga friend, many sessions down the track, they may come and find that he has been seen as a betrayer for treating surface dwellers with anything but resentment, and so has been placed inside of the Durga Hammer, now zombified and forced to do the bidding and the will of the Durga society. Your players will then most hopefully feel this gut-wrenching pain and maybe feeling a little bit like it's their fault. Not wanting to destroy the creature, but also knowing that this is not in existence for them. These creatures have multi-attack, they have a decent amount of strength, and they are siege engines as well, so they can put up a bit of a fight, especially if you have a couple of them in the way. As a DM, you can decide if ripping them from the machine will actually save the Durga, or most likely will actually help them pass on and move on to wherever it is the Durga go when they die. Or the second way, which I really like, but it really is dependent on your players. Perhaps you have a player who did play a Durga but decided that their story had ended, or that they weren't really enjoying them and they wanted to try a new character. Well, don't just throw that Durga away. your players got to know that character. That character lives in your world. Maybe they were captured. Maybe they're the ones that were seen as betrayers. That will really tug at the heartstring of your players and can really propel your characters moving forward into the Underdark and trudging down and finding out more answers to whatever story it is that you're really telling. So think about the Durga Hammer for your next Underdark campaign, or maybe just as a side quest, because perhaps they're just digging up into Waterdeep or any other city and they need to be dealt with. The Gnome Wizards of Lantern, which is a whole nother story. If you would like a Lantern video, then definitely comment down below. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to these guys. But basically, they're like the big inventors of the Sword Coast, of Faerun. So they actually create these really interesting constructs known as clockworks, and they actually can come in a lot of various different types of forms. But one of the best yet that I have seemed to find is the Oaken Bolter. It's literally just a voice command ballista. So how does this really come into your campaign? These creatures sport a couple of really interesting features. First of all, they can roll along on their clockwork wheels, basically moving about however they need to, but they have a lance harpoon, harpoon that they can shoot up to 100 feet, so a lot of range, or they have an actual harpoon itself, which they can shoot pretty comfortably within 50 feet, and if it digs into your players, it can then pull them and reel them in very slowly. Now, if you really want to cause a lot of trouble, these creatures have, how do I put it? It's like kind of like an explosive arrow almost. Basically, they can shoot up to 120 feet, this non-magical fireball. Basically, it's like throwing out like a rocket launcher, which is awesome. So how are you going to use it in your campaign? What are you going to do with these things? One of the first things that come to my mind is basically, if your players are sieging a city, have these creatures up on top of the wall, and they're shooting their harpoons down, reeling in their enemies, or they're shooting down their lantern bolts, basically just attacking from 100 feet away, and then obviously blasting them with fireball. Or vice versa, have your players protecting a city, and then this orc army comes in, but then they have these oaken bolters with them, and all of a sudden they are firing and destroying the walls. That is definitely going to set your players back a bit. Not too much of an overall, this is going to end the game creature, but definitely a really good tech if you're doing those more large-scale battles. Our final construct for this video is something that I truly find sickening and horrifying. When I found this creature, I never knew about it, and I thought, this is really disgusting, to be honest. Basically, it is a creature that is something for a bit of a high level party, somewhere around 6 and higher, maybe even 10 to be fair. It really depends on how you introduce this creature itself. Now, the construct is known as the Cadaver Collector, and it literally wanders through battlefields, either while they're still raging or towards the end of the battle when all the bodies are dead on the ground. And they pick up the fallen during the battle and they attach them to these pikes that protrude from them. Now, when they do this, they actually add the weapons and the shields and the armor of the dead to their armor class. So they have a base level armor of 17, which is still pretty hard to hit, but should they be picking up more and more enemies and attaching them, DMs, feel free to add to their AC, making them harder to hit, making them last longer in battle. Now, they are immune to all weapon damage unless it is adamantine material. And so you'll need to be using your spellcasters more and your magic weapons more should you have them. But how do they actually arrive? How do they show up? Because these constructs, what are they? So they actually aimlessly wander through battlefields collecting bodies, and they continuously walk along the planes of existence, waiting to be called forth by necromancers or warlords or even war chiefs to these great battles, where they know that they're going to be getting more and consume more for themselves. So they're pretty just difficult. If you want to use them in your campaign, I would suggest having your players be part of these battles so they get whittled down a little bit. And when this Cadaver Collector shows up to protect the person who's called it forward, the war chief or necromancer, then they could literally go down, pick up an otherwise just barely living friend of the players and attach it to them. Now, that will really set your players off and should really continue the battle and give them more oomph to spur on and live. But how do they go in a battle? Now, your Cadaver Collectors actually have a paralyzing breath that can stun and paralyze your players, causing them to have a very difficult round for the next turn. Having your Necromancer or War Chief, that called them, giving them the chance to run away and flee for another day, or have them come in and get one final kill, knowing that they may not last the next round. They're pretty tough. They can create specters, these spectral souls, like anguished souls that come out of the dead bodies that are attached to them, destroying the actual soul, creating them, making them undead, so they, even if you were to kill them, they can't travel on to their godly pantheon. These Cadaver Collectors really are quite horrific. There's something out of a horror story, so I'd encourage you to try them out in your campaigns. I haven't quite found where I'll use them in mine yet, but I'm waiting for that big siege battle, or maybe my players will wander through a battle that they just missed out on, and as there's mist moving around, they see this hulking figure moving through, lifting up the bodies. It could be very interesting, very eerie and frightening. So our honorable mentions as we wrap up this video are some creatures that I actually really love using, and I didn't put them in the main video because, to be fair, they are pretty common, which is your animated objects. So imagine just having a room. I've run a session where there's been a whole room of just animated objects. There was things such as a rug of smothering on the floor that wrapped around my players. There was an angry tea cup and tea set that would fly at my players and try and knock them out and kill them, really. It was really fun. We had the couch that was eating the players. We had portraits that, though they couldn't actually do much, the actual paintings themselves would come to life, very Harry Potter-esque, and they could actually throw paint blobs at their at my players, blinding them for part of a turn. So play around with the animated objects. You can be really creative with them. Imagine your players walking into, let's say like a bedroom, and all of a sudden the dresser opens up and tries to suffocate and destroy and kill the poor gnome, pulling them in and wrapping them up in the clothes that are also come to life. They can be really, really great. But next week, join me for Celestials, and I will see you then. Have a great day, and check out any of these other videos. I think they'll be on this side, or they'll be on this side. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and comment down anything you want to say.